Okay, good morning, Council, and good morning, Six Nations. Do note we do have the live stream going. We are going to look to get started. First item on the agenda is the identification of media.
Victoria Gray from the Turtle Island.
Good morning, Victoria. And is there anyone from Two Row Times? Seeing none, we'll go on to the next item on the agenda, which is the adoption of the agenda. Is there anybody to move and second the agenda?
I'll move.
Moved by Carrie.
I'll second it, Melba.
Seconded by Melba. Opening up for discussion, any additions, deletions to the agenda? Hearing and seeing none, we'll move to the vote. All in favor? Opposed? The meeting agenda has been adopted. Moving on to the declaration of conflicts, we can declare now, but as always, declare as the items come up. And moving us right into our first delegation, which is Lifelong Learning Task Force. I understand Heather Watts, Acting Education Manager, is available.
Yes, hi, good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm doing well. And yeah, I hope everyone else is doing well.
For the presentation.
Well, Sego Sewakwego, good morning, everyone. My name is Heather Watts, and I am the Education Academic Lead for the Education Coordination Office, which supports the work of the Lifelong Learning Task Force. And as of April 12th, have assumed the role of Acting Manager of the Education Coordination Office. And I'm really happy to be here today to engage with you on the topic of our work, as well as our funding proposal, and to answer any questions that you might have to the best of my ability with the information that is available to me. And normally I'm on the other side of these things watching it at home, so it's interesting to be on this side of it. And I want to take a moment to introduce staff from the Education Coordination Office who are here with us this morning, and who support the work of the Lifelong Learning Task Force. We have Clinton Paulus, who is an Education Finance Analyst, Michael Hill, who's an Education Policy Analyst, Verna Johnson, who's the Education Administrative Coordinator. And she's not on here at the moment, but I know you all know Amber Squire, who is our Language and Cultural Specialist. As well as, really also want to acknowledge the work of our core team who lead the work of the Lifelong Learning Task Force, elected Chief Mark Hill, elected Councillor Audrey Paulus-Bomberry, President of Six Nations Polytechnic, Rebecca Jameson, from Native Lands Limited, Phil Montour, Coordinator of Six Nations Language Commission, Karen Sandy, as well as Federal Schools Representative, Reva Bomberry. And as you all know, there are two phases to our work. The first phase is really looking at a K-12 education strategy, and that is what we are in the thick of right now, which will bring us to the end of the year and looking forward to draft recommendations that we will put toward the community on the education strategy for K-12. It's my understanding that in the briefing note that was submitted, it wasn't quite clear what the ask or the recommendation might be of the Education Coordination Office. So Nathan, if you feel it's appropriate at this point in time, I can put forward those asks or those recommendations.
Yeah, maybe now, and then just that reminder at the end of the presentation.
Okay, great. It is our recommendation that the political liaison approve the proposal prepared by the Education Coordination Office of the Lifelong Learning Task Force entitled Six Nations of the Grand River 21-22 Structural Readiness Proposal. And it is also our recommendation that the political liaison support the submission of the proposal prepared by the Education Coordination Office of the Lifelong Learning Task Force in the form of a letter of support to Indigenous Services Canada to be signed by Chief Mark Hill, and a draft letter of this is enclosed in your meeting package, which we submitted. Other things in the way of updates, as I said, kind of at the beginning, this is 2 phases of our work, and we are right now in the thick of K-12 education strategy. And in the coming months, what this group as well as the community will have to look forward to is a lot of draft recommendations and draft models that will be put forward to the community, primarily on our online engagement platform, Othello, but also, paper copies of these are always available. Any member of our office is always available by email, by phone call, as we want to make these draft recommendations and draft models really accessible to the community, and know that everyone can't connect in the same way. And so topics that are kind of coming down the pipe here. Our secondary school study is wrapping up, and that work has been led by Rick Hill, and we're really looking forward to engaging with the community on those recommendations. Our governance task team has been working really hard on thinking through, a draft model, draft terms of reference, draft recommendations as to what a governing body may look like, and or multiple kind of like iterations of what that might look like. And so in the coming month, we'll be looking to engage with the community on that topic as well. We will also be looking to engage with the community in about the next month and a half on the work of our funding task team, which is kind of right in the kind of middle stages of work at this moment. And we are also right now starting our Ongwehoe advisory group, which will be led by our language and cultural specialist, Amber Squire, as well as our youth task force, which is just gearing up, and that work being led by myself under my academic lead portfolio. So I'm going to just stop there and see if anyone has any questions or areas that we can offer some clarification on.
I am not seeing any no hands being raised. Is there any further questions, clarifications?
Then I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
Okay. Thank you, Heather, and thanks for the brief overview. So I apologize, I can't access the Dropbox where my notes are, but I did read the information, and I know the fund is a structural readiness. So I want clarification again. Is Six Nations taking over education?
Yeah, so the work of our mandate really is to explore options and make recommendations, right, on what a lifelong learning task force grounded in language and culture might look like. So that community, I wouldn't phrase it as a community decision making, but how the community takes up those recommendations and engages with those recommendations is actually outside of the mandate of the Lifelong Learning Task Force. And we really want to ensure that we stay within our mandate. Totally open to having a discussion of what that might look like and or how that might change, depending on what this body and everyone involved, around the table here thinks. And that is something that I made sure to include in the political liaison update for this month, is that while a communication strategy, like how we actually get the recommendations out to the community, is within our mandate, and we can make recommendations on how the community might engage with the recommendations and say yes or say no. Technically, that actual kind of decision-making mechanism is outside of the mandate of the task force, as well as, a negotiation strategy, which again, we can make recommendations on, but the actual mechanism is outside of our mandate.
Okay. And so the role of the governance task team, what is their role?
Yeah, so the governance task team has, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Michael, I think you all have met 8 times, maybe 9 times, and have been, looking at other models from other communities, as well as really building on the work of kind of the 2 previous efforts here regarding education, to think through what might a governing body look like here at Six Nations. And Michael, feel free to jump in here and add on and fill in any holes that I'm not representing, the work well enough on. So.
No, I say that's pretty accurate. Again, we're just developing recommendations. The actual, I guess, decision to take over education isn't up to us, but it's just like, if we were to, this is what it could look like. Again, that could change depending on community input as well.
And I guess that's my issue, is we've taken this to the community how many times and they continue to say no. So what are we doing about infusing like land-based learning into the curriculum? That's where I think we should be going, instead of going back to the community. They continue to say, no, let's not take over education. So then how do we make it our own? And I guess this is where I'm a little, here we go again. So that's just my comment. And my last question is, I sit on the Language Commission, and we had a meeting last week, and I don't recall this even coming forward to the Language Commission. And so I know that there is funds that will be, I guess, for language. So how do they work hand in hand? I know the Language Commission is on the task force, but if they're not aware, then how are we all working together?
Yeah, first, so kind of respond to both things you're putting forward here. And so first, your comments about, land-based learning, right? And I still hear that. In my position as academic lead, I actually have the great, and this isn't me being dramatic, but I actually have the great honor of actually engaging with educators and going to home and school meetings and hearing from students, and hearing what it is that is going on in our schools has been incredibly refreshing. What it is that our teachers, our school leaders, our students, our leads, our EAs are doing is incredible. And the amount of innovation that is happening in our schools is something that is really to be celebrated. And I think oftentimes our schools are kind of painted in this, deficit lens. And so really just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge all of the great work that is going on, across all of our schools. I've had opportunity to sit and listen at home and school meetings, as well as other schools as well, and engage with the principals. And when thinking about the learning environment, right, which is one of those components which we will be making recommendations on, land-based learning is absolutely a part of that. And we will actually in the next month or so be engaging in a holistic education study with a consultant, and that is going to be a really important component of that study. Now looking over to language. when thinking about funds that we may be asking for in the structural readiness proposal for language, it's really around language. We're not sure we're going to receive the funding, right? Of course, for things in here, but for funding in relation to language and culture learning for the Education Coordination Office team, and as well as engaging with specifically members of the Ongohongi advisory group on our draft recommendations, and are those rooted in language and culture? And what we're really thinking about is, if we are saying that our mandate, right, is to make recommendations that are rooted in language and culture, we, as those people who are involved in that work of drafting such recommendations, need to ground ourselves in language and culture as well. And we cannot be removed from that. And so when it comes to funds that we are asking for in relation to language, we know we are nowhere in a position to be teaching language. That is not our work, but more learning from folks who do engage in language learning, as well as really that lens of, are the recommendations grounded in this type of learning? Because the last thing we want is to just think of language and culture as another component that we just try and push in to a system that was not made for us, right? How can we kind of flip this and think of language and culture as being the foundation for our system? Sorry, really long-winded answer, but I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. And actually, I just have you said you've been meeting with the home and schools, and I know I wasn't at the last home and school because I sit on the home and school too. And when have you been presenting or engaging?
So I can actually pull up those exact dates and send them to the folks around the table here. But most of the engagement at the home and schools that I attended were in February, I believe. Yes, where most of them were in February. And I went to one per school, except for Oliver and Smith Gauniel.
Thanks.
Nathan, it's Hazel.
Go ahead, Hazel.
Yeah. Morning, Heather. I just want to say, with regard to the lifelong learning, like this whole undertaking commenced back in the 57th Council, and basically it is a look at our education system, what it is and what it can be, and it's being looked at continuously, and it's developing with all of the good things that our education system can look at. But when the question is asked, are we taking on education? That final decision will never lie with the lifelong learning review or anyone except the community. And I think this lifelong learning is a whole new beginning for our education system on the reserve, where our children will have the best learning opportunity that they've ever had. Before this, we had to just go along with what the federal government provided for our schools, which was not even comparable to off reserve. So I think I like the work that this lifelong learning group is doing. It involves many, many people who attended all of the meetings right from the start and engaging in it to the point where they are now, and we're going to get a full picture. You can't present to the community if you don't have all of the facts and all of the correct information. So basically that is what is being worked on for the final decision to go to the community to determine if we do take on education. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Hazel. I do have some questions coming through on the chat. I just want to quickly acknowledge some of them have been answered, but This question is dealing with funding. So the question is, so funding the study and make recommendations, not actually funding the education. Can we fund first language speakers and elders to mentor? VR education for land-based cultural appropriate curriculum on and off the territory, homeschooling, university level, vocational training for education sovereignty, and general Indigenous education across Turtle Island, question mark. So there was a lot in that one, but I think some of it you've already answered, but I just wanted to get that out there as well.
Yeah. So thank you for the question. Whoever posed that question from the community. When thinking about the engagement that will be happening this summer regarding the funding task team, there will be elements of a funding formula that will be put forward, and that's largely the work of Clinton as well as his funding task team, and so these things I think are really, really important to think through. We engage as just kind of from a listening standpoint with the First Nations with Schools Collective, which is a collective, as the name suggests, a collective of First Nations communities who are engaged in similar work. And some of them have already assumed control of their education systems, and within that work, thinking about a funding formula is within that as well. And so, some of what we've been thinking through with the funding formula is what is going on in those conversations, as well as what is the current allotment for certain parts of the funding, because we do know right now, right, the funding is very piecemeal, and what we're trying to do is think through a funding formula that is more holistic, right? And when thinking about language and culture, it can't mirror, right, what is going on in school districts that surround Six Nations only, right? It needs to be, if we're talking about grounded in language and culture, it needs to be bigger and be more representative of that mission. And I'm actually really we're really these types of questions and this type of thinking is just what I think really informs the work and makes it a lot more robust. So also just want to take the opportunity to really encourage the community, folks who are tuning in now or asynchronously to engage, right? We really, really appreciate and need, not even appreciate, right, need all those voices around the table as we're thinking about this education system and the strategy.
Thanks for that, Heather. The next question is, right now teachers are tax-free with full pay in their profession compared to off reserve. Will taking over education reduce their pay?
Yeah, so kind of, I guess, in a similar wavelength to the previous question, when thinking about, the First Nations with Schools Collective, we are taking, a lot of lead from there. And so Clinton, I don't want to kind of misrepresent anything here. So maybe you want to speak to that question a little more pointed.
Can you repeat the question again, please?
Right now, teachers are tax-free with full pay in their profession compared to off reserve. Will the taking over education reduce their pay?
Oh, well, that's a question that we hadn't really looked at, but we are looking at a funding model, and we are looking at proposing a funding grid. And that is being proposed right now to be developed by us for us. So we will have our own. We are basing that funding grid, that salary grid, off of other models, particularly the GSN, which is the Ontario model, so that we will be comparable, and that we will. The ideal is that we want to make sure that the people that are working for us, for our education system, that they're well paid, and that we're competitive in the marketplace, and that they want to work for us. So To answer that question specifically, I don't know yet. We would have to look at that actually, and we haven't yet. But right now, we're just that's our train of thought with regards to that question right now.
Thanks for that, Clinton. I'm going to go over. I see Wendy had her hand up.
Morning, everyone. Sorry, I'm late joining, and I missed the presentation. Just a couple of things overall. I see that this is a request to support the proposal going forward to continue to do the work on the recommendations. And I guess overall, in terms of on the face of this, and a comment about teacher salary. I mean, I was of the understanding that teachers don't necessarily have pay equity to start from the get-go. So in terms of the comparison of what teachers make now, federal or otherwise, in comparison to the province. So I think we're under, because there's that notion that because it's non-taxable, people get paid less. So maybe starting point there. But overall, on lifelong learning, we're in a bit of a disconnect here, because everything that we've done is in the steps or the phases, and it's called lifelong learning, but we don't follow that. We're not doing a continuum of education. It's not lifelong. We're doing what the Psc policy says, and it's just a portion, right? It's just elementary right now. I mean, it's weak on secondary, and it doesn't even touch post-secondary education. And if we're looking at this moving forward in the takeover of education, my view is that we get one shot at this. So it should be education in its entirety, lifelong learning. So how can we call it that if we only choose to do a section of it? Because that's what the policy says that's being, identified right now under the federal government. If it's ours, let's make it ours and make sure that it's that. So that's the one concern that I have on all of this. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Wendy. Great points. Is there Audrey? Did you have your hand up, I believe?
Yeah, I was just going to answer the tax issue, and that the tax that's not being paid now by First Nations will continue. That is the premise that we are working on.
Yeah.
And with this other question that Councillor Johnson just brought up, lifelong learning will be including everything. Right now, the budget that we're working under includes K-12, but all the rest of the areas will be included in. It'll be another phase to this. JK now, then we'll be doing the early years, then we'll be doing the post-secondary, and then we'll be doing adult. That'll be one phase together as the next phase. So right now we want to get K-12 manageable, because it's so mammoth, as you know. So we're trying to work on this and trying to get this section done and take it out to the community, and then we'll grapple with the next phase, and that won't be probably till the following year. Thank you. Heather, if you want to comment, that's fine.
Just before I go to Heather, I see subsequent from Wendy, and then we'll go back to Heather.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan, and thanks for that, Audrey. And I understand that. I mean, I've heard it and I've seen it enough times, but that's my exact point. By doing that, the whole notion of splitting it up and only doing one section at a time, and then the others will come later, it's not lifelong learning, right? We're only looking at K-12. For the most part, it's elementary to 8 because it's on reserve. So we've split that up and we're doing what's already dictated under federal policy. So by separating it out, we've just created silos. And I know the intent is there, but it's not lifelong learning, because the whole concept of First Nations control of First Nations education is that it's our system, it's laid out, it's all connected, we can't separate it. So we're creating that silo ourselves. So that's my concern. I don't know if there's another way to address that, but post-secondary education is just as mammoth as K-12. So we talk about students who can't go to school. We talk about students who can't get funded. We talk about all of these things, our priority list is, I don't know how far it is. You know better than me, probably, I don't know, 1 to 12 right now. So what are we doing about all of that if we're not laying it out in lifelong learning, the continuum of education? Because I mean, we have experience in this. We go forward with, phase 1 of this, and whatever happens, will we ever get to phase 2, phase 3? It's like when you build a house, right? You say, well, I'll just do what I can afford right now, what's under here, and you never get to those upgrades or those other pieces. It's just the way that it works because of resourcing. So that's my concern on this.
Okay, I'm going to go to Heather and then Michelle.
Great. Thanks for those comments, both Councillor Johnson as well as Councillor Paulus Bomberry, and even reaching back to your first comment there about pay being inequitable for teachers, like right from the get-go. I think that that's something that's really, really important to put out there and to recognize. And when we're thinking about education from, for us, by us, we can't be reinforcing that same notion that teachers are being paid less across the board, right? We need to really value education in a way that we do in many other professions. And so I really appreciate that point. And then, transitioning to thinking through, how we do have these two phases, right? Of, first the K-12 strategy, and then moving toward, everything that comes before K and everything that would come after 12th grade. I totally hear those concerns. And, I think they're, completely, they make a lot of sense and they're completely valid. And I think when we are thinking about, 6 nations and the very vast population that we have, that the thinking behind kind of chunking it in this way was so it wasn't biting off more than we could chew in that way. And also want to acknowledge, the advocacy and the work that is going on in those other spaces as well. Right, the advocacy and the work that is going on in post-secondary, and I think that's also why it's really important when thinking about our core team as well as members of the Lifelong Learning Task Force, that in its creation and its inception, even though we're working on a K-12 strategy, it wasn't just okay. Well, let's get only the K-12 folks around the table, right? That's not the case. We do have people who are from our early years as well as post-secondary and beyond, who are around the table, who are putting forward their opinions, their 2 cents, they're weighing in on draft recommendations as well. So they are connected to that work, and so I hear you. I hear you, and I think it makes complete sense. And going forward, I think that's something that we need to hold and really know that this is all interdependent, right? And I think lastly, thinking through K-12 is really important in terms of thinking, well, what comes after that? Like, do our students well prepared, by our own standards, right, to continue engaging in learning? And so I think that's really why there's a lot of attention being paid to K-12 in this phase 1 of the strategy right now. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Heather. I'm going to go to Michelle.
And can I be next, Nathan, please, Melba?
Gotcha, Melba. Go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you. And Wendy articulated it very well. My concern was PSC isn't even on the information. And I personally think they should go hand in hand, because we have a lot of well-educated members who could actually give back at the elementary level. So why are we not doing them simultaneously? And that's just my point, my comment.
Thanks for that, Michelle. And then Melba.
Yes, concerning the Lifelong Learning Task Force, what is the understanding of the goal of Indigenous Services Canada to turn over our education system to the provincial government? And are they talking about that's very acceptable, or what's the views on that?
Does someone have a response?
So on both fronts, Councillor Bombury, about your question here, I think while we are focused right now on the K-12 strategy, that we don't see that also as only folks who have K-12 or K-12 teachers can engage right in those recommendations or in that work, right? The door, the opportunity to engage in that work is always open, and we encourage the community to bring forward their opinions, and also really also acknowledging that not only folks who are educated from, I don't want to say Western, but in academia, have a say in this, right? We are all stakeholders when we're thinking about the future of our education system, and I know everyone around the table here, care about the future of our education at Six Nations, and not only our current students, but the faces yet to come. And so everyone in our community is a stakeholder and has valuable input based on their education experiences. And then when thinking about Councillor Thomas's question in relation to Indigenous Services Canada, my response to that would be thinking through that negotiation strategy is outside of the mandate of the Lifelong Learning Task Force, and we will be looking to make recommendations on what that might look like, but technically it is outside of our mandate.
Thanks for that, Heather. And I have Wendy, and then we'll start looking to wrap this up. Wendy?
Yeah, thanks. And I understand the strategy around it, and not biting off more than we can chew, but education is massive. I mean, that's probably one of the reasons why we haven't done anything with it this far, because this is what, the third overall education review that's been conducted with all the recommendations, and it's not been accepted any one of those times. So it's what we make it. And I guess I'll ask Audrey, you're the education rep and you're the chair of this task force. So what happens in the meantime as this phase one? Like, can you tell us what the existing Psc policies are, what's being done with them, and what's happening in the interim as this phase one goes forward? And then how far out is Psc and everything else? Is it 1 year, 2 years, 3 years in all of this? But what's the gap right now in post-secondary education regarding the ISC policies?
Well, the gap is quite significant because our kids are only getting $800 a month living allowances. So it's really, really low. And right now at Grand River Post-Secondary, we're looking into that right now to see if we can find some ways in which to augment or give incentives to students. So right now we will
Sorry, Audrey, I'll tell you about the federal policy.
Well.
The federal policy. That's the Six Nations policy. I'm talking about the federal policy.
So at Lifelong Learning, we're not into that yet. That's going to be the next phase. So we haven't looked into all of any of that stats or any of that data. So again, that'll be in the next phase, in which case we're going to have to be looking at writing proposals for more money in order to do that. So the money we have now is earmarked. We have to do more proposals for that. And look into it deeply, and as we will be doing with the early years, as we will be doing with adult education. So it's going to take us some time, and we're looking at that starting for next year, and we'll be looking for everybody's input on that. We'll be going to post-secondary. We'll be going to everybody who has an opinion, all the students who have been affected, because they have been affected, and we only have so much money, and we have to look at how we get more money for our students on Six Nations, and in order for them to have a quality education, to become and take any kind of skilled trade, any kind of academic course they want to take, to have the career that they want. So it will be looked at, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Wendy, supplement?
Yeah, last comment. Sorry, Nathan. Yeah, so that's the issue, Audrey, because right now there is no policy for post-secondary education at the federal level. All they have is the post-secondary student support program, which is limited, and Saskatchewan gets the lion's share of that. So Ontario takes a huge loss in it. So then you have the post-secondary student support program with the funds that actually go to students. So there's a gap there as well, but there's a lack of policy in the federal level altogether for post-secondary education. I mean, there's things going on right now. There's a huge research review nationally looking at costing around PSC. There's a national post-secondary education engagement strategy, which is looking at identifying regional models of what that looks like. So by us not knowing that information, by us putting that aside until next year to even look at it, all of this stuff is going on where we could be making recommendations and having impacts, positive impacts for our students and building this case forward. And we're losing out on all of this stuff. So that's what I'm talking about. We have to understand what those policies are federally, what's going on, those impacts, all of that. And it has to be included in lifelong learning moving forward. Otherwise, it's a huge hole.
Thanks for that, Wendy. Okay, I've heard, oh, Audrey?
Yeah, just to speak to that, Councillor Johnson. Polytechnic, post-secondary right now under the leadership of Justine Henhock Bomberry and Dr. Susan M. Hill are looking at that because we're part of the engagement strategy, and we've just started that now of looking at how to get our voices heard at the federal level. So, and that's what is being asked. And then that will come out to the community. I'm sure in surveys, it'll come out to all the students who can then give their voices. And we're looking at hiring a person right now to do this. And it's gone out twice in the newspapers for hiring, and we still don't have someone to do this work. So I guess what I can do is give it to all councils so they know what the position requires, and we can put it out again, and maybe just by hearing my voice out there, it may spark somebody to say that some kind of the research that I want to do, I want to be able to go and help. So that would be great. So yes, it is being looked at right now on Six Nations. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Audrey. So I'm hearing, one of the things I'm hearing is the need for us to at least have the information on lifelong learning, and the focus, you know, obviously is on right now K-12, but there's so much impacting not only K-12, but it happens at the early and long years, and it happens on the post-secondary side. So I'm wondering, is it possible at least to give us that entire kind of project update? And I know, at least myself, when I am a counselor and not chairing these meetings, I did ask for that kind of session where council spends a few hours and gets that full wholesome update. And even at that time, you know, some of us are project managers as well. We could probably help with some good suggestions or recommendations on how to get this back to a project that is, you know, lifelong learning in scope, because I think the pieces are there. It might be just the way it's presented. It might be just how, you know, how it's presented to council with looking at it from one lens and not really looking at it from those other lenses. So I'm wondering if it is possible for us to look to schedule that session. I see it as a strategic session to give constructive recommendations to the Lifelong Learning Task Force on you know, the overall management of the project, and so that we can get some of these things back on track as it relates to it, the lifelong learning pieces, and not just the K-12. So is that kind of where we're going and where we need to land on this front? Heather?
Yeah, I think, you know, our office, would welcome and love a session to be able to, you're talking like 2 to 3 hours, and I'm just thinking, who gets to have 2 to 3 hours with the elected council, and like that's just what a great opportunity that would be for us to be able to sit with you all around the table and discuss where our work is at, and where we are envisioning that it is heading in the coming months, as well as maybe some long game strategic planning. So I think would really welcome that strategic planning and working session, because also is something that's really important, as I said earlier, is that we are all stakeholders in this, and knowing that different counselors have different portfolios, if it relates to health or other portfolios, I think is are perspectives that are really needed, and something that would be really important and help inform the work that we are doing. So the short of that answer is yes, we would really be excited to have such a session. So thank you for offering that.
Okay, Council. So I know this is in the action items already, but I'm just going to underscore it and emphasize it. Teresa, if we can get some traction on getting this session together, because I think it's needed. I know we've talked and had these presentations a number of times at Council, and it just reverts back to the need to have a strategic session going forward. So with that, Heather, if there's nothing else, I'll thank you and your team for the time, and we'll look to aggressively get that scheduled within the next few days. Before we end this, though, there were two final comments, so I'm just going to go to them, acknowledge them from the chat, and I might butcher the name of this program, but I think it's ACELUS is a program that is willing to add culture and language courses. It costs $50 per student for unlimited course preschool to 12, used by 6,000 plus school districts, pairing teachers with speakers, immersion in language and culture. Please don't also forget off-reserve or off-territory Haudenosaunee who have access to Indian education programs and funding for sustainable and education sovereignty. And the final comment was just an FYI, multi-generational learning connected to the land, language, culture, charter, school provide funding bridge to sovereignty, also collaborating with Indian education programs funding. Charter schools have funded residential schools for housing, education and healing, vocational training, teachers, mentors to help people with employment, self-employment. So those were just the final two comments in the chat. I just acknowledged them. And again, thank you, Heather, and your team for the time this morning. And we look forward to the strategic session on this going forward.
Thank you so much, Councillor Wright, and to everyone around the table here for the dialogue and for the time. And did just want to make sure our recommendation, for the support of the submission of the proposal was also, on record.
Thanks for that. Okay, Council, we'll go on to the next agenda item, which is the adoption of the Political Liaison Committee minutes. Helen?
Move the minutes. Move the minutes.
Okay, moved by Helen. Audrey? I believe you're seconding, you're on mute. Okay. Okay, the minutes have been properly moved and seconded. Any comments? Hearing and seeing none, going to the vote, all in favor? Any opposed? Hearing and seeing none, motion has passed. Item number 6, political updates. Any councillors with an update? Seeing none. And can I get a motion to adjourn? Moved by Sherry Lynn. Seconder. Second by Michelle, all in favor? Any opposed? Hearing and seeing none, motion has passed. I'd like to thank the community for the time this morning, also for their comments and questions as it relates to lifelong learning. Very valuable. And wishing everyone a safe and healthy day.